Okay, and we are back with chapter 15, the One World Order. And again, I have a couple of little quotes at the top of this chapter. One's from Paul Warburg from the Council of Foreign Relations. He said, "We shall have a world government, whether we like it or not. The only question is whether it will be by conquest or consent." And also one by Bill Cooper that states, "The new world order will sail in on a sea of blood." Okay, chapter 15. So Lucifer's plan is to rule the world, and the world needs to be ready for him. Like he needs a global government and a temple in Jerusalem. And we must be primed to accept Luciferianism. It's understood Israel would not have come into existence had it not been for the horrors of the Holocaust. This event fulfilled what God had foretold, namely that Israel would come home in the last days. And then in 1948, Israel raised her blue hexagram courtesy of the Rothschilds. They paid for the flag. It's noted that grandfather Prescott Bush helped finance Hitler through Union banking, and it's recalled that Albert Pike postulated that we'll need 3 world wars before we'll accept a global government. Congressman Larry P. McDonald stated in 1976, "The drive of the Rockefellers and their allies is to create a one-world government combining supercapitalism and communism under the same tent, all under their control. Do I mean conspiracy? Yes, I do. I am convinced there is such a plot, international in scope, generations old in planning, incredibly evil in intent." Respectively, David Rockefeller, in his book Memoirs, which was published in 2002, was proud to be called out for being in a secret cabal that's intent on establishing a world government. The cat is out the bag. The globalists aren't hiding their ambitions anymore. And the sheeple are partial to this idea. The UN seems like a force for good, like the World Health Organization. The noble UN wants us to share resources, save the environment, control the population, and no more wars. We're one world, so why not remove barriers and borders and install a universal socialist government, complete with a global tyrannical police state for our protection? Beloved Jesuit Pope Francis is on board, so it must be good. And philanthropist Bill Gates calls on a global government to solve the world's problems. Suffice to say, after World War III, the sheeple will demand a global government to prevent any more wars. So the ancient plan, yet to be fulfilled, ramped up a notch with World War I. World War I, which took place between 1914 to 1918, began when Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated by a member of the secret Serbian military society, the Black Hand. Apparently, the Black Hand preceded the Mafia in the US in the 1920s, which are orchestrated by the Jesuits. This war drew in all the world's great economic powers, which assembled into 2 opposing alliances, namely the Allies and the Central Powers. And the Allies, mainly Britain, France, and the US, prevailed over Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire. It's also noted that Britain and France, who were confident that they would conquer the Ottoman Empire, had planned how to carve up the Middle East, i.e. the independent states, and that included resurrecting Israel. Lord Rothschild was promised a national home for the Jews in Palestine. Then, in 1918, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, Britain occupied Palestine. At this time, only 5% of the population was Jewish, and 95% Palestinian Muslims and Christians, and they lived harmoniously. From 1918, Jewish colonial immigration was sponsored from Europe and the US, and as it transpired, the Arabs in Palestine were less than pleased when increasing numbers of Jews arrived. Thus, in 1923, Britain divided Palestine. 75% of the land that was promised to Israel was given to the newly created Transjordan, meaning across the River Jordan, for the Arab Palestinians, and the remaining 25% was to be for the Jewish Palestinian homeland. So both Arabs and Jews had their own homeland. 2 states were created for 2 people. However, the Arabs were not pleased with this either and launched relentless attacks on the Jews to drive them out. After the First World War, which claimed circa 16 million lives, the world concurred that war was dreadful. Hence, the League of Nations was established in 1920. The stated aim was to maintain world peace. They further endeavoured to improve people's working conditions, tackle disease, drug and human trafficking, and they collectively promised to disarm. It was progressive to be more unified. As it transpired, however, the League of Nations failed in the 1930s because it didn't have any real power. Countries could still do what they liked, like Hitler did when he ignited World War II, which took place between 1939 and 1945, with his false flag attack on Poland. And whilst he was seemingly defeated, it appears not. As mentioned, Hitler and his Nazi buds took refuge in the Americas, and they took their technology with them. Nazi intelligence via Operation Paperclip were given positions in the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the forerunner to the CIA, supposedly to gain information on the new enemy, Russia. However, before we get to the Cold War, it's acknowledged that demon-possessed Hitler did his job. He killed millions of God's people in the most horrific way, and thereby provided Israel with much-needed sympathy. The world didn't care much about their problems in Palestine, which Britain still ruled over. But moreover, when World War II ended, which killed circa 80 million lives, the world came together yet again to pledge never again to allow World War to happen. Thus the UN was established. Whilst its legacy is in the League of Nations, this peacekeeping body was more hardcore. It had to be strong enough to prevent World War III. Clark Eichelberger, one of the UN founders, wrote in a journal article, World Government via the United Nations, "The United Nations is far from a league. It's the beginning of world government." The UN could collectively solve the world's problems, like the Israeli-Palestine headache, which Britain was happy to hand over. So the UN voted, and the land was portioned between Arabs and Jews, allowing for the formation of a Jewish state of Israel. The UN assigned 55% of the land to Israel and 45% to the Arabs. The Arabs were not at all pleased and staged a walkout in protest. When Israel raised her flag in 1948, British forces did a shoot, leaving her to fend for herself. Immediately after that, the Arab armies invaded Israel. Israel held her own, and when it ended, Gaza was controlled by Egypt and the West Bank by Jordan. Then Israel took on her neighbours in the Six-Day War in 1967 and prevailed. She seized the remaining Palestinian territories of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, as well as the Syrian Golan Heights and the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula. She gave Egypt back her land in 1979, but she's hung on to resource-rich Golan Heights. The West Bank is still occupied by Israel, but is ruled to some extent by the Palestinian Authority, and the Gaza Strip is governed by Hamas, who hate Israel. Like Hezbollah in Lebanon, hate her. The fireworks have been endless. Whilst the UN affirms that East Jerusalem forms a part of occupied Palestine territory, Israel believes it belongs to them. Israel considers that Jerusalem, whole and united, is the capital of Israel, and wants the city to remain forever under its sovereignty. It's historically their promised land and their Temple Mount. It's also noted that Trump recognised Jerusalem as Israel's capital in 2017. The Bible tells us Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling unto all people and a burdensome stone. So that's Israel's story after World War II. And just after World War II, the Cold War began, and the extremely profitable nuclear arms race was on. The world needed more of that carnage. It was notably called the Cold War because neither the Soviet Union nor the US officially declared war on each other, despite their great ideological clash. Suffice to say, the capitalism versus communism dichotomy has worked a treat, as they knew it would, hence they implemented it. It's also noted that President Dwight Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex back in 1963. This is the unholy alliance between the government, the military, and the corporate industry that manipulates weapons and technology for the military. In brief, peace is not good for business. Meanwhile, the family were creating global vehicles, which besides the UN included the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, the Club of Rome, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. They formed the G7 and G20 to merge countries economically and politically, and institutions like the World Economic Forum. And they formed military alliances like NATO, which according to Tony Blair would make the backbone of the New World Order military forces, or the New World Order Army. He also stated this would happen whether anyone liked it or not. That was cited in Wheeler 2009. The family also needed resources, spoils from war, like heroin from Vietnam. It's understood the Vietnam War was much more about heroin than it was about communism. As touched on, the CIA need drugs to fund their black operations and to devastate the world morally. Hence their antics in Afghanistan. They would help Afghanistan take on the Soviets, who occupied their turf from 1979 to 1989 by creating Al-Qaeda, and they would help themselves to heroin. Thus the CIA spent billions recruiting, training and arming terrorists, so-called Mujahideen. Osama bin Laden became the frontman for resistance. It's like how the CIA helped the Contra freedom fighters in Nicaragua by selling their enemy Iran weapons and giving them the proceeds. The Contras in turn shipped crack cocaine from the US for more funds. As highlighted, the CIA organises illegal drugs and arms trades, like apparently 6 AK-47s are traded for 1 kilogram of good quality heroin. It's like the CIA worked with Pablo Escobar on behalf of the cartels to flood the US with cocaine. However, I digress. Once the Soviets left Afghanistan, the Mujahideen turned their guns on each other. Tyrannical warlords and Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, which is a branch of the CIA, were in control, and the Afghan people were in despair. Thus, the Taliban came to the rescue. The Taliban, a strict religious set, endeavoured to take on the corrupt warlords. They wanted to defend the rights of all Afghans and establish order and justice. The Taliban became internationally recognised as the legitimate government of Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. They also collaborated successfully with the UN to impose a successful ban on poppy cultivation. The result was opium declined by 90%, so that wasn't good. The family also wanted black gold from Iraq and to destabilise the Middle East. The first Gulf War, 1990 to 1991, Operation Desert Storm, was led by Father George Bush. It was sold to the sheeple and lies in a mountain of propaganda. Iraq and Kuwait had long-standing issues, like Kuwait was allegedly siphoning off Iraq's wall using slant drills, which the duplicitous US gave them. So Iraq was losing billions. In response to their culmination of historical and economical issues, Saddam had decided on war. However, before he embarked down this road, he checked with the US what their reaction would be. He was told the US had no opinion on their conflict and had no special defence or security commitments to Kuwait. Saddam was given the green light. As it transpired, however, this provided the perfect excuse to invade Iraq. It seems pertinent to highlight the propaganda because it's mental and the sheeple invariably buy into it. Like a key inflection point that moved the Americans towards supporting war with Iraq was Naira's bogus testimony. She claimed Saddam's troops killed 312 babies. They were ripping babies out of incubators and leaving them to die on the cold floor. It's unbelievable. It also seems pertinent to mention the Project for the New American Century because this revealed their plans. The stated goal was to promote American global leadership, and it listed several countries that needed a regime change. These were Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, North Korea, Sudan, and Lebanon, those without a Rothschild central bank. The report was produced in September 2000. A year later, 9/11 happened. This report also stated that a catastrophic and catalysing event like a Pearl Harbor would get the ball rolling. Baby Bush called 9/11 the new Pearl Harbor. It's understood the Twin Towers were pulled, controlled demolition, like Building 7 was pulled. It's noted the 9/11 Commission, also known as Omission, report didn't mention Building 7, which is said to be the Achilles heel of the whole debacle. Apparently, Building 7 contained top-secret documents that had to be destroyed. Flight 93 was blown to smithereens over Pennsylvania, and it seems a missile went into the Pentagon as there was very little evidence of a plane and the hole was too small. There was a very specific trail left for the FBI to find and concoct the story about 19, mostly Saudi Arabian hijackers who hijacked 4 planes, religious zealots who were partial to coke, booze and strippers. Al-Qaeda was responsible, the terrorists the CIA created, and somehow Saddam was linked to them and 9/11 without any evidence. Saddam had non-existent weapons of mass destruction aimed directly at us. We could be toast within 45 minutes. We were also told the Taliban in Afghanistan were harbouring Osama bin Laden and his nefarious buds. So we needed to invade Israel. We needed to invade both Iraq and Afghanistan, which we did. In addition to the billions scored in oils, billions have been scored by heroin. The CIA ensured that poppy production in Afghanistan returned to an all-time high. In the interim, terrorists continued to make their presence known to keep us trusting our governments, like the 3/11 bombings in Madrid in 2004, the 7/7 bombings in London in 2005, and the Boston bombings in 2013. Libya was next on the hit list. Before we trashed it, Libya was the richest country in Africa. Gaddafi insisted that everyone deserved free housing, education and cheap oil. His people loved him. So it was a setup. Al-Qaeda invaded his turf, which he recognised, and when he endeavoured to take them out, NATO took him out. The sheeple were told Gaddafi was the worst, so it was kind to intervene and ruin them. As Gaddafi also quite rightly warned, this would result in an influx of Muslim immigrants to the west. Libya was the cork of Africa, and when she popped, that would happen. This was, however, part of the plan for more discord. Chaos precedes order. Syria was next, and like Libya, Syria was also in good shape. It was secular and people lived in harmony. They had good healthcare, free education, and almost no poverty. However, we were told that Bashar al-Assad was the worst, so we ruined them too. Assad was also set up. We kindly supported the moderates to try and take him out, which resulted in supporting ISIS. However, they had Russia on side, who defeated ISIS, aka US-made Al-Qaeda. Thus, Syria remains in the hit list, along with Iran and North Korea. It seems pertinent to mention Aaron Russo's disclosure because he summarises what's happened to date and what's yet to happen. Thus, he divulged a conversation he had with Nicholas Rockefeller, who told him 11 months prior to 9/11 that there would be an event, and this event would lead to the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. He said the US would take over the oil fields in Iraq and establish a base in the Middle East, and then they would go after Venezuela. Apparently, Rockefeller told us we'd be looking in caves in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and there's going to be this war on terror without any real enemy. Russo said the whole thing is a giant hoax. The war on terror is a joke, a farce, a fraud. But furthermore, Russo was told the end goal is a new world order run by bankers. The future is cashless. The aim is for us to become microchip slaves of the state. We'll be connected to a global database using our chip for transactions, but Russo highlights they could switch off our chip, preventing us from buying anything. Like dissidents will need to forage for their food. It's noted the Bible tells us about the beast system in the end days, and that we'll need to take the mark of the beast to make financial transactions. It's also secularly purported that we'll be connected to the internet by our chip. We'll become transhuman. It's insane, yet it's happening. It's also noted that the COVID scamdemic has further united the world. This man-made catastrophe, which has raked in billions for monkey vaccines, has demonstrated how inextricably linked we all are. We're also not particularly happy with China, which is the idea, or Russia. Indeed, that Putin's the worst. It seems World War III is in the post. The family must decimate economies worldwide so they can implement the new financial system. All economies are introducing digital currencies, the precursor to one global centralised economy and currency. And of course, there's the ongoing climate crisis, which necessitates global governance. Roll on the Great Reset. Okay, that's chapter 15 done, so we'll go on to chapter 16.